Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs, their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com. The average time between being hacked and realizing you've been hacked is 1 year. Can you afford to let an intruder roam your network for that long? Can your company weather the fallout when this comes to light? Black Hills Information Security can find the bad guys in your network and train you to do it yourself. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a hunt teaming engagement can help you find a persistent threat in your network. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Let's see. I've got an announcement, which I think... Oh, it's coming up. Hold on. I do have an announcement. Yes, Recorded Future is one of my announcements. Visit recordedfuture.com/security weekly for all things Recorded Future. They will be coming on the show this year at some point. Very happy to have them as a sponsor, Boston-based company. Great company and great services that they provide for free. Like if you go to recordedfuture.com/security weekly, you can subscribe to their daily email of threat feeds. So you get a threat tip every day, which I think is cool. You should do that. Anyway, did I have other announcements? Oh yeah, of course, InfoSec World, where Chris Morales, myself, and a whole bunch of other people from Security Weekly are going to Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019. That's right. You can go to infosecworld.misty.com. Use the registration code OS19-SECWEEK. 15% off the main conference or World Pass. If you're interested, again, in doing a briefing or interview with Security Weekly, please go to securityweekly.com/conference request. If you work for a security vendor and you want to see them engage with Security Weekly, tell the team, send them there, securityweekly.com/conference request. And now we're going to talk about stuff. I like these segments because we were like, oh, crap, we don't have a technical segment. And the technical segment I had was more appropriate for Enterprise Security Weekly. So you can listen to it there. And then tonight we are talking about, I have 11 topics.
Oh, my God.
Do you want to start? Does anyone have a topic they want to start with? Do you want to pick random? We can't really pick random numbers because everyone can see it. I suppose I could get a random number. It would only be pseudo-random anyway, so what's the point?
Oh, my. Are we going to go there? Where's the neutrino detector? Get the damn neutrino detector. I need it. All right, no.
I thought Joff was going to say, I was pausing because I thought Joff was going to say something.
Oh, well, I was just muting myself again because I was like, they're just ignoring me. But,
Joff,
yes, pseudo-random.
Joff, how did you get your start on information security? I don't think you've ever talked about it on the show.
No way. You're really asking me this?
I'm really asking you that, yes. Imagine that.
Okay.
This is the beauty of the topic. We can say whatever the hell we want now. I love this segment. I think
it's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful, man. It's beautiful.
Actually, so does anybody remember, this is related, does anybody remember that time when there was sort of a split between sort of systems and networks people and information security? There was a distinct period of time, probably
yesterday, or
like this morning.
In some organizations, maybe as early as this morning, John.
Yeah, that's this morning.
Yeah, maybe it's never happened in some organizations. But so how did I get my start? Well, it really happened because there was a period of time back in my university days, and Paul's really familiar with this because he was a university person as well.
I was in the University Days movie with security people, yes.
That's right. Where always in the systems group that I was in, my boss was very, very interested in information security. In fact, that was his primary focus. And when the amazing organizational split period occurred, like this, right? I ended up on the operational.
What was the split, Joff? Because I do remember working in university from 2001 to maybe 2007-ish time frame is when I worked for the university.
Yep.
That where there was multiple shifts. Like everyone said somewhere that security should be part of the systems administration group, and then everyone said, no, that's not right. Security should be part of the network group. And then they said, no, that's not right. Security should be part of the information security office. And they said, no, that's not right. Let's go back to network. We were all over the place, Joff.
No, it was totally all over the place. And it turns out, okay, just this is turning into a long story, but
that's okay. We got time.
By an accident of the fact that I was into systems administration at that time with Sun Solaris systems, that I ended up building networks because in 1999, does anybody remember that period of time where Ethernet could not be transmitted over optics? At that time, it was all just thin wire or very short distances. Okay. And there was a bridging technology that emerged, and the bridging technology was ATM. And ATM was the only optical technology that was available to get you over more than 1,500 feet.
Yep.
And most universities were large enough from a campus perspective that they needed to get over those distances. Well, this is a long way of saying that we embraced a technology that actually used a route server to make the routing decisions, which was a Sun Solaris system. And they looked around the shop and they said, hey, who knows Sun Solaris? And my boss said, well, Joff does. It's like, okay, he's the network guy. So I became a network guy just by virtue of the fact that I was fucking around with Sun Solaris systems.
But Joff, before you go on your story, looking back on it now, I really think that we're blessed to have been moved around to all of those different groups, and I'm not sure if you hit all three. I definitely did the trifecta, right? I was security guy working in a sysadmin group, security guy working in a network group, and security guy working in a separate security group. But the beauty of that is the experiences that I gained, not just from understanding the dynamics between those groups, but gaining all of the knowledge from systems and network was hugely valuable. Like, I almost think there should be programs where interns do time in all of those different. It sounds like prison, right? It depends if you're doing Windows or Linux or Unix systems administration. Whether it's minimum or maximum security prison somewhere in there, you can rank those how you see fit. In any case, I think it's beneficial for folks to have those experiences.
Oh, there's no doubt at all. In fact, I wouldn't trade it for the world because, in fact, I've had people come up to me at conferences and stuff. Well, I want to be like you, or I want to be like a John Strand, or I want to be like a Paul Asadorian. Then how do we do that? I was like, well, you put in your time. What do you mean?
Lots of cigars and booze. Oh,
yeah. And then I sort of unwrapped the box. I'm like, well, I went through all this period of systems admin. I learned how to hack systems up and down and understand the Unix system. And once I learned how to do that, then I became a network guy, and I learned everything about packets there was to know. And I spent years doing that. And actually, this comes back to my story. What I learned very quickly in a university setting was the enemy are your students, because they will attack the infrastructure.
True.
Okay. Love them. They're our customers as well, but they attacked the infrastructure. And so you learned very quickly that if your network infrastructure was not extremely resilient and robust, it was going down. I mean, it was straight up denial of service, right? So I developed a number of techniques, and I learned as many features of different software sets to defend the infrastructure as I could. So my experience was crafted out of defending the infrastructure from denial of service, largely, in that context. But I had all this great systems background as well. And then towards the 2011, 2012 period, I started to move out of that. I wanted to move out of that state government state government career, because basically the money fell out. Everybody remembers the recession of 2008. We all went over the cliff, and a lot of state agencies suffered dearly at that time. In fact, I was going to get out in 2008, but I ended up waiting because of the recessionary period. But I always wanted to go back when that split happened organizationally between security and operations. And I ended up more on the operations side, even though I was engineering and doing security operations, because that's ended up being my job. I was engineering defense. I was doing IDS, IPS. I was doing all the operational side of security. I always wanted to be in a security group and dedicated to information security as my job. And I engineered my way out of that particular period of my life. And it was DerbyCon. The next thing that happened, and this is why I was so passionate on our last episode about what Dave has done for the community. The next thing that happened was I started networking as much as I could through a combination of information security conferences and SANS training. And that's really what got me jazzed up and headed in the information security direction. There was a lot of Mike Poore and Ed Scotus in the early days, 2008, 2009, 2007 actually as well, where I spent a tremendous amount of time and spent some state dollars getting training. And I literally trained myself out of my job at that time and eventually moved into working with John Strand at Black Hills, which is a really fantastic thing. So that's kind of my journey, a long story, right? So,
I love that. I love that Joff is also a packet nerd as well.
Yeah, I can talk packets. There's a guy that does talks at cons quite frequently, Paul somebody or other. I can't remember his last name. Paul, I really apologize if you're listening. But he does a lot of BGP talks. He does routing protocol talks. He does network defensive talks. And we had him on the show at one time, Paul. Southern guy. I forgot where he lives now. But it was fun when he was on the show because we got to sort of talk packets and have a lot of fun with that, because I spent a lot of time not only engineering enterprise network level at the university, which is 13 to 20,000 subscribers or endpoints, but also scaling up. And I ended up consulting a lot for wide area as well in the 250 to 300,000 scale in terms of endpoints, in terms of subscribers. And so I got to see some things that, your regular local area network guy probably wouldn't normally see. So that was really valuable. So that combination of really deep systems administration experience and huge exposure to networking, combined with my existing skills with application development, that's sort of the trifecta for me that led me to information security because of my interest as well. And that kind of background is just a huge enabler.
I wish I could keep some of that information fresher in my head. As I sat in front of a Cisco switch this week and I was like, shit, I don't remember. Like, it's sort of coming back to me, but then I'm like, I get into the more advanced stuff. Like, how did I create like, I used to have these commands on the top of my head.
Yeah.
Now I got to look them up, like how to create VLANs and trunking and all that stuff. I'm like, how do you set I'm like, I know what I want to accomplish. I know the lingo and some of the commands, but the exact commands are gone because I haven't been doing it lately.
Yeah, so I had to get very deeply into defending the network infrastructure from the perspective of defending the control plane on pretty high-end devices, right? You're talking about your Nexus devices. You're talking about your Cisco Cat 6500 series, which was a very long-lived series after the 5500 series. And if you didn't defend them appropriately, so in fact, I'll give you this is again, a denial of service example. If you're able to send a packet into a network and decrement the TTL so that when it hits the router control plane, it only has a TTL of 1, it will always be processed on the control plane and not in the ASICs.
What's the max value of the TTL in IPv4 header, Joff? I'm just going to ask you trivia questions now.
255, right? But
thank you.
It's an 8-bit field.
8-bit field.
It's an 8-bit field. But if you manage to hit the router control plane with a TTL of 1, especially with a highly fragmented packet, that routing device is going down without a doubt, right? Because what happens is TTL 1 is down to, I'm going to drop the packet. And that decision is something that cannot be made by the ASICs. And so it goes up to the control plane, which is a software processor. And the software processor is not built to handle traffic at volume. And so you just keep hammering that thing with packets at the appropriate TTL, and it's going down. without a doubt.
There were so many. You talk about Cisco 5500s and 6500s. I felt like they were really fragile back in the day. Like I remember troubleshooting issues, and sometimes, like Job said, it was like legit DOS attack or just trying to process weird traffic.
Yeah.
I feel like stuff is a little more resilient today. I don't know.
I think it is, but the thing people have got to realize is, I don't know what the state is now. It might be interesting to have a Cisco person come on and talk about it, but back in the day when those things were being engineered, and we're talking 6-8 years ago now, those they were engineered with just the minimum specs in terms of processing power. They did not over-engineer them. It was just enough processor, just enough memory in each of the queues for the network interfaces, according to best practices at the time, right? And there's a lot of actual computer science that talks about router queue and the stochastic effects of TCP buffering and its impact on the internet. I did actually a whole research paper on that.
Nice.
But it was minimum engineering because they wanted to get maximum bang for the buck. Like any company, they were not going to deploy too much hardware out there or too much software out there, just enough to get the job done. And so the ramifications of that, and they did realize in the infrastructure world that they needed to provide control plane policing because the control plane was vulnerable, due to this minimalistic engineering.
Doug,
and it's cool.
Sorry.
I get it, right?
Sorry, Job, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to also ask Doug. I know, Lee, you answered the question, how'd you get your start? Doug, I don't think you ever talked about how you got into security. I mean, obviously you were studying computer science in school, right?
I was drunk. No.
I was that the whole time too.
111 years ago, when I was 10 years old. That's a movie quote. Well, interestingly enough, what Joff was talking about with these splits and all these things, I was on a different wave of this than Joff. So
that's because you hung out with Lou. Let's be honest.
I didn't know Lou at that time. But yeah, when I was in college, I was a sysop for PDP-11. And
you are old.
Yeah, well, it was actually being end of life, but we switched to Deck 10, and I also was a sysop for IBM mainframe. And like Joff said, one of the things at the university was that the students really went after these devices, and honestly, at the time, security wasn't really a thing. Mm-hmm. It was more of a gamesmanship sort of world. And
you ended up hiring the students that hacked into your stuff.
Because
their intent was just really nothing. It was just curiosity.
Well,
and you're like, well, you're curious, and wow, you're really smart. You learning the stuff on your own. Like, you should come work for us.
And it was a nerd effect in that everybody that was doing all this stuff was in the game. You know, and until the world changed and all these other people got involved, most people perceived security was just a bunch of nerds messing with each other, and so therefore it is of no concern and we shouldn't spend any money on it. But when I first started working on the mainframe, I started writing scripts that, the initial scripts I started writing were looking at traffic and these were pre-TCP networks, they were proprietary, but we were looking at traffic on those networks for certain behaviors. And just like one of the scripts I wrote really early on was just people trying to escalate privilege. So I had this thing that I called the shit list of user accounts that was automatically built for me every day, that I wrote this script, and it watched for people to type certain strings on the mainframe, and it put them on the shit list so that I would know who they were, because I was like, people that know how to type this are trying to escalate privileges. They're trying to change into other people's directories. They're trying to create pipes and links into other places. So they must be trouble. And so we actually went after them. And that was how I kind of initially got into security, from the perspective of, I realized this was an issue because we were seeing expansion in who was using the systems. And when I was first using computer systems, there was 9 people on them. You know, all of a sudden there was 900 or 9,000, and it got to be a really complicated problem because these people were taking the system down. They were causing issues. They were stealing people's stuff. They were playing jokes on people, and it got to be really ugly. And it turned into a mess for our job because we were trying to keep the lights on, and we come to work every day, and somebody's like, oh my God, you know, that whole file structure got corrupted by somebody, and we don't know who. And it started being like, how do I stop these people from doing it? Because there was literally there was no security really. There were backdoors and our logins and all kinds of things equivalent on those systems that had been built by the engineers that designed the systems who left those holes in them, and all this early stuff you heard in hacking. So if you go read those early things like the Happy Hacker's Guide to Happy Hacking or whatever that thing is. Yeah. The stuff they're talking about is so simple. It's just taking advantage of the fact that, it's like saying, well, used to cars didn't have keys, so you could just get in a T model and drive away, I guess. I mean, but they didn't have keys for these systems.
Is that also when you were in college?
Yes, it was. Actually, I was before that. We rode a buggy down to the mainframe center and had to tie that up outside. Often gunfights
on that topic. If I want to chime in, I was one of those students that got hired because
damn you.
One of my projects when I was in college that I didn't. I was finishing a degree here in the United States, and one of my projects that I started towards the end was an online multiplayer game, and it turns out that the systems department at the university had a Next. Does anybody remember the Next?
Yeah, that was Steve Jobs' company he founded after Apple is BSD based, right?
Yep.
The Next
exactly.
Cube, right?
And this thing was actually relegated to the corner, and nobody was using it. So I said, "Well, can I have access, please, sir?" And I started running a MUD on that, which is the multi-user dungeon. And before you knew it, I was running user counts on that MUD that were 40 and 50 users playing multi-user dungeon all the time. And I was actually starting to push the limits of the internet bandwidth at that time, which was something miserable. It was like a T1 or some bullshit. We're talking 1990, I don't know, 1993, 4. Somewhere in that period. And I was running a fucking huge multi-user dungeon, and like all the systems guys at the university loved it. They're like, let's hire that guy when he's done doing this.
These kids today and their fancy T1s. We had a T-1 when I was working on it. It was like,
good Lord.
So yeah, I was the quintessential heretic at the time because I was hacking around with the Next, and it was cool.
All right, let's go, Lee. Comments.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, Doug, did you have a formal job description? Or were you making it up as you went along because you were solving problems?
There was a title called SysOp, because system operator, and
it wasn't even system administrator then.
It was called. Operator. Well, and I mean, I was a student, so I mean, I worked at Mainframe Center, and I had a job called SysOp, and I was PDP-11 SysOp because when I was
back then the operator was a very common term.
Well, the operator was root. I mean, SysOp was meta user king, and I got that job because when I was in high school, I worked for a company that they had dial-up mainframe access for their processing, and I learned all this PDP-11 stuff. And when I went to school, they were like, I went down there, was like, can I get a job? And they were like, do you know anything about PDP-11? And I was like, I'm there. And they were like, well, you're the new SysOp. You're in charge. Have a nice day. And just keep it running. And if anything goes down, you're at fault. So, just keep that in mind. And then you got to learn all this great stuff because...
And this wasn't in Rhode Island, right?
No.
You didn't grow up in Rhode Island.
No. It was in Tennessee.
Tennessee, that's right. Okay.
And you got to learn about professors and professors. But we had the little frosted glass window like in a doctor's office, and people would bang on it, and the professor would go, why have my security job or my statistical jobs not been processed? And it's like, well, let me explain. Do you know what a sunspot is? Okay. Sunspots emit this thing called a Z-wave magnetic interference, and that magnetic interference comes down and it affects the platters because, see, the platters are horizontal, so they catch a lot of magnetic interference from the sunspots.
Was it a physics professor that could totally show you up?
No, they were like business professors. They don't know what the hell you're talking about. They go, really? And they don't know anything about computing. The physics professors didn't know anything about computers. They're just like, really? How do we stop that from happening? Well, first thing you have to do is you have to put tinfoil all over the top of your terminal. That will help. Probably won't fix it, but it will certainly help. So why don't you go do that, and let's see if it improves. And then it's like, I hate that guy. He's got job priority 99. I got a B in his class. Yeah, we'll fix that right up.
So Doug was literally the sysop from hell.
I was. I was the bastard operator from hell. I mean, I swear that guy stole half that stuff from. I mean, he didn't, but I mean, everybody was doing that kind of thing because nobody knew what the hell was going on. People would come down and knock on the glass, and they'd be like, "Is my job finished printing?" No. You see, the printer, it has to print each letter very slowly using a small nib, and it makes each one of those little dots you see on the green bar. And that takes a long time, like days, maybe months, but someday.
You really did say all this stuff too. That's the hilarious part, because I can totally picture you
and
as
I
a
can say it
college
with a
kid
straight face
behind the safety of the glass window.
Right.
Going, I'm totally gonna mess with this.
You
next
got that
person who comes up to
PhD
the
student.
window.
You got the PhD student from astronomy who finally got to use the computer, and you get to mess with them like that. Like you may think you know something because you've been looking at stuff up in the sky, but you don't know nothing, buddy. You see all those pipes? Yeah, you know what's running in those pipes? Radioactive freon. Radioactive. It's radio and active at the same time. And if that stuff leaks because you send too much crap down here, we all die. You too. And I wouldn't touch those reports because there was a problem earlier. But go ahead.
That was Doug Sissop.
He was the sysop from hell, man. I swear to God.
That's awesome. Wow.
Such an asshole, and I love it.
It was fun. We had our little glass.
I want to talk about the future, but talking about the past has been pretty entertaining so far.
I tell you what,
Right?
we lived in a hole in the middle of the road, and you had to duck when cars. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Sorry, I'll steal Monty Python.
I did like, I have to admit, I did like VAX VMS. I think it was a solid operating system.
It is. It was still around until not too. There was Open VMS, and that continued for a long time. I used to know one of the main contributors to VMS.
Yeah, I mean
It's a Danish guy. He was awesome.
until that, VAX just finally kind of went away, and
Yeah. Well, then it was Open VMS.
yeah. I mean, they had Open VMS for a long time, and people still ran it on certain platforms. Plus, there was a lot of those platforms out there, and if they quit supporting it, to run something. But there were people that knew VMS, so they just ran it.
I tell you what, at the time that I was looking at Open VMS, there was still a lot of Windows 95. And when I learned about VMS, I was like, wow, that is a far superior operating system to what we have today in the Windows world.
DEC was so far ahead of its time.
The tragic irony is that the core of the Windows NT kernel
Was
came
from VMS.
From a digital equipment and Microsoft project. Which is I think that's terrible. The other tragic irony that I should mention, and it's just kind of a quick shout out, the first mainframe guy I encountered when I was a student ended up being a person I worked with. Really great gentleman, kind of a sysop from hell as well. But unfortunately passed away fairly recently, so I had to go to his service. But I really kind of miss those days.
So let's stay in the past since we're on this topic.
I guess
I have a question.
Did.
We are sticking to the questions, right? We talked about how Doug and Joff got their start in information security, which took us in the past. What were the most challenging parts of your security career back in the day?
Me?
Anyone?
I think mine was the same as it is today. It was convincing people that security is something that you have to have, and that it's not just an expense that doesn't result in anything. It's really tough to sell organizations on that, and in the past it was almost impossible to sell them on it. And then today, only when they start getting attacked and only when they start suffering do they then start going, why don't we have more security? And, so I honestly, I would say that in the past it was that, and in today it is the same. It's the same. It's a little easier.
We've come a long way.
We've come a long way. Today there's products you can show them with fancy flyers, which helps. But there's also.
But I think there's certain industries and sub-industries that we no longer have to spend a lot of effort convincing that they need security. I feel like the financial industry...
That has improved vastly because they see the results of problems. They know that people get hacked. They read about it, and it's a lot easier to sell somebody on it, but they still
But that's still not a majority, I would say, because you go to a lot of small businesses especially, and it's still a lot of convincing. Joff, Lee, comments on what was most challenging for you in the past?
So mine, just to, to take it back to the academic world for a minute, was the operational imperative. The academic folks, especially the folks who were dealing with large statistical data sets, they really wanted network performance. I mean, they were driving, gigabit Ethernet really early because they wanted to get that data moved across the network.
Yep.
And so anything that we deployed from a security operational perspective, if that got in the way of performance, that was immediately the enemy. So as you might imagine, the early firewalls and the early IDS and IPS, or I should say IPS systems, had the effect of doing things like reordering some TCP frames and perhaps dropping a frame or two because of their inspection. And that pissed a bunch of faculty people off. I mean, it just pissed them off flat out. And they're like, hey, don't get in my way. And invariably, the directive came down to favor the operational environment versus the information security environment.
I'd say for me, I think it was, now that we think back to some of the earlier days, was convincing people that security was a thing that needed its own group and its own funding and its own processes, its own mission, and defining how we interacted with all those other groups. And I still think to bring that to today, that while most organizations recognize a security division or group within the organization, I think the thing that's still challenging is how we interact with all of those other groups. It's greatly improved over time. I still think there's a lot of work to do there.
Yeah.
It's still a challenge today. Most of the challenges I hear from our listeners and those in the community are, and usually like when they're talking to me and they're a fan of the show, they're like, I hear you guys talking about X, Y, and Z, and like I'm still trying to get my company to buy into like A and maybe B. Never mind, some of the things that I heard, you or your guests talk about on the show. So I still really truly believe that convincing people that what they need to do with security and interacting with other groups in that capacity is challenging.
Paul, you actually just really reinforced what I just said, right? The Phoenix Project. Mm-hmm. The idea is security does not need to be a shop that says no. Security needs to be a complement that is aligned with business. And if we cannot make that argument, then we will never actually win the political and subsequently the budget battle. You've got to be able to make that argument to say we are aligned with the business. We are enabling the business by mitigating risk. And if we can't do that, then we're never going to get the resources we need.
It's true.
No, it is.
I think some will say, it's to a certain extent, I agree, other than when there's definitive proof of gross negligence, that when a company's breached, one of the first things that an organization will do is just fire the CISO. Like, that's a good public relations move. Like, just do that. I'm like, no. Now there's someone with really valuable experience, because you learn more from your failures than you do from your success. Like, that person should continue to be a champ. Maybe not in every case.
That's somebody asked me on the phone, not just like last week. A guy called me, and it was a C-level. He said, "Should we fire the CISO because we had this problem?" And I was like, "Why would you do that?"
Why would you do that?
I said, "Did the CISO do something wrong?" And they were like, "Well, we got had a problem." And I'm like, "Yeah, but why did you have the problem? Was it because that person willfully didn't secure something, or was it because they came in and said, 'Can we have this budget?' And they said no. So maybe you need to fire whoever said no to the budget." And he was like, "Oh, well, thank you."
And I'm all for total ownership and all that stuff too, but at the same time, usually when the victim of the ransomware attack or social engineering, usually that person doesn't get fired, right? Yep. And I there's been some debate about what punishment, and I don't agree with a lot of the processes in terms of punishment around that. You wouldn't necessarily hold that person reliable. Now, one could say the CISO does have responsibility for security in the organization, but there's so many things that go into that, right? And so many things that are beyond control. You want a CISO there to help you recover from the breach, learn from it, and move forward.
I mean,
right?
if the CISO made every effort to put good policy in place, and it, you wouldn't budget or it didn't work. I mean, you don't fire the COO when somebody backs a forklift over somebody.
It's good analogy.
You go down there and you say, did this guy back the forklift over him because he was drunk, or did he back the forklift over him because we have a lack of policy, or what? And you have to look into it. And they would never even think about that, about going down there and firing the guy who got run over, or firing the COO because somebody backed a forklift over somebody. But when, security events
I
occur.
will say that a CISO always needs to have a prioritized shopping list in their back pocket.
Yep.
Because inevitably, when the political battles fail, and they do, some disaster will happen.
Yeah.
And when that disaster happens, a C-level person is going to come to the CISO and say, if they don't fire them, they're going to come to the CISO and say, what do you need? And you should rip that list out of your back pocket and say, here it is.
I agree.
But that doesn't necessarily have to be a shopping list. I disagree with the shopping list. That needs to be a list of initiatives that might be supported by technology purposes, but that needs to be a very targeted list.
That's what I mean. It all comes down to money anyway. So, I was just shortcutting the middle part.
Have it tattooed on the palms of your hands.
Okay, that's a little extreme. Sorry, Lee, you had a comment.
So I was going to say, one of the things we're dancing around is the what level of implementation is going to work. We all know there's no such thing as absolute security, but there are those out there that you say, we put in this, and they'll think that's the absolute panacea, then nothing else will go wrong ever. So I find there's that education piece in working with them, because they, you don't have an infinite budget unless you're in .gov, and even then,
No, you should never talk in absolutes. Lee's exactly right. If you talk in absolutes, you're being foolish, right? It's always an incremental scale. It's always, we're going to get this much better. There is no perfect solution, right? Even though C-level folks are going to say, I want you to stop this. I want the perfect solution, right? There isn't one.
No, I was sitting at a board table once, and I was being the advisor to the C-level people about these marketing presentations, and in between them, the CEO said, "This will fix it all, right? I mean, it's going to work after that, and we're not going to have this problem again." And I'm like, "No, that's not how this works. This is just reducing risk. You're mitigating. You're not eliminating. You're mitigating." And he was like, "Well, what will it take to eliminate?" And I was like, "Well, how much money you got?" And even then, it won't work.
Right. We're going to encase all the computers in concrete, and they will be fine.
Yeah, quit using computers. Back to the heliograph.
Cut the wire. Go back to a mainframe. We'll just have everything.
Yeah, and I have to prevent myself from saying, if only we still had the mainframe. But
well, we still do have mainframes. They're still in use today. They haven't gone away completely.
Just have to get rid of that internet component. That's what causes all your grief.
Yeah. Well, you don't need communication. Screw that.
You know what, though? Even if we don't have the internet, you're still going to get hacked.
Well, yeah, you got hacked on the old mainframe. We didn't have the internet when I was a sysop.
Does the mainframe have USB ports? Do the ones today have USB ports?
Oh, yeah, well, they probably, I don't know. I haven't seen one. Surely they do.
I don't know why I just thought of that really bizarre question.
I'm sure J-series and stuff for IBM does. I don't know. I mean, that's the only thing I've seen, but I haven't. I don't know.
Next time you're in a data center,
I know.
Just be like, hey, can I check your mainframe for USB ports?
Crawl around back there and be like, yeah, it's a 360, 370. It's been in operation since 1967.
I don't think that model has USB ports stuck.
That model does not have USB ports. But IBM may have made them by now, so you could buy a big bolt-on chassis.
Wow.
It's like a giant...
I tried that line on a good-looking girl. I said, can I check your mainframe? And she's like, fuck off.
You have to have hardwired terminals?
Good Lord. Wow. All right, where are we going next?
The history of mainframes.
The history of mainframes. We're still stuck in the past. This has been like the history of computing.
It's not my fault. You asked.
All right, so let's stay on that topic because it's our show. We can do whatever, talk about whatever we want. I am looking because I reference things and I get strange looks from younger folk when I talk about Unix, and I'm like, well,
Unix wasn't what I thought he said he was going to say.
Unix was in Unix. People are like, you mean the people that castrate themselves? I'm like, no, like Unix, and I'm like, the operating system. They're like, oh no, you spelled that wrong. Isn't it Linux? I'm like, no,
off.
Linux
That's what
is
I
a
would say.
kernel. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, there's the whole GNU utilities, and then Linux was just a kernel, but all the other things came from this whole genealogy of Unix. And they're like, do they submit a sample to Ancestry.com?
Oh my god!
No, not the people that don't have genitalia.
But there is a
You know
chart.
what you know what I'm so amused by? I'm so amused by the fact that Paul is actually detecting a little generational difference here.
Yeah, that's how old I am now, Joff. I am. I'm at the point
which
where
is really for us old fucks really amusing, right?
because I am the youngest person on the show right now.
Yeah, you are
Probably
now.
by 10 years or more. Just saying. Just throwing that out there.
Yep.
So,
God, that's
but
cold,
hold
man.
on. Let's get back.
See what rap music caused?
Yeah.
Smartassery. That's what it caused.
I'm full of that.
Get off my porch.
So, but the whole going back to Unix and understanding where everything came from, it's one of the things that I'm including in my now keynote presentation that I'll be giving this year. And I think that we need to learn from the past, and what a better way to learn than understanding where things came from in the Unix and Linux world. And just in Linux, it's just like if you look at the genealogy, I mean, Linus is a smart guy, came up with a friggin' awesome kernel. Obviously, we still use it today, but so much of the history behind the commands that you're typing inside of Linux today has a history that goes far back beyond Linux. And I mean, I'm excited in a way that Linux is a common term and understanding in most people that do computers today, and even some outside of that. I think that's really great, right? And that certainly wasn't the case 20 years ago by a long stretch, right? But so now that Linux is common vocabulary, you talk to people and they're like, they don't understand anything that, like, how we got here, where we came from starting with PDP 11 was actually where the first, in the charts that I've seen, is where it first came from.
Yeah, that was all that.
That's where
ancient
everything
stuff.
was based on.
And I mean, Linus did a great thing, but he didn't invent it. And I mean, he would never tell you that he did. I mean, he basically re-engineered something that was there.
So here's the thing, and I'm glad you mentioned re-engineer. So speaking of rap music, right? Music in general, and this is one area that I didn't get into a lot of detail in my DerbyCon talk, but in my upcoming keynotes I'll be talking about quite a bit. And it was Kevin Finisterre that challenged me and said, there's this thing in music, it's called the amen break. And I'm like, what is that? He's like, go research it, it ties into your talk. And he's like, and then tell me what your security amen break is. And I'm like, okay. So I researched the amen break. It's like some little known blues/jazz musician that released an album. On the B side of that album, there's only one song on each side. That's all it could fit back then, right? On the B side of this album is where they sampled the amen break. It's the most famous sample in music history, the most sampled clip in music history. It's in over 1,500 songs today. And the sampling crosses genres, rap music, all the popular music, I mean, you name it, rock music. I mean, it's been sampled. There's actually a GoFundMe to get the person more money for because it was sampled so much.
Wow.
And so then I got started thinking about Kevin's question of, well, what is the amen break in computer security? And I really came down to the variants of Unix and BSD and Linux and open source. We've got lots of amen breaks that we sample from to create great, even Linux, as you said, and other variants of Unix or BSD have sampled from the past. I mean, so to put it at the top was PDP 11. What was was that the operating system that they developed for?
I don't remember what it was.
What was that? I don't even remember,
what it was called.
That would be the amen break, right?
Yeah.
It's the thing from which all things are
everything's being
derived.
sampled out of that. And
Right.
I mean, partially because it was available. And I mean,
and then there were several other amen
there's all
breaks that
kinds
came
of
after
trees,
it, right?
yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
When we look at the shells and
Well, like-
bash, and we look at the system D, which we talked about, I think, last week, and all of these different concepts that, quite frankly, today is a source of a lot of frustration as the Linux distributions change things over and over and over again. And we're like, this worked in like 1975 all the way through 2005. There were no major engineering issues with certain technologies in the realm of technology that we're talking about, yet
Right.
people just seem to want to change them. But anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
My question to you, though, is
So I remember-
is the operating system reached the point where it is no longer relevant? I mean, if you look in the world of application containerization, and we see effectively what is segmentation at the app layer, which is way above the OS, does the operating system actually matter anymore?
That's an interesting question.
It's the concepts from those operating systems still matter because you still at some point have the operating system underneath, and we can't forget about it completely because there's still security things that have to be done.
I think it's security we can't forget about. I think the level of abstraction has, for most users, has reached a point where that it's almost irrelevant.
I don't know user-wise, but developer-wise, Joff, I agree with what you're saying, right? I think less and less the developer has to have an understanding of the application, especially when we talk about serverless and containers.
Well, I think it leads into the question of, should we redesign the stack? Is the operating system so irrelevant that it needs to be customized exclusively to support containerization these days? Maybe it's not the right model anymore.
Lee, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, I'm not sure if we're all the way there yet, but we are fast tracking to where what's happening at the OS level doesn't matter very much because all I can care about is my containers working, which is great. You can secure the snot out of that layer and the hypervisor, but then you're still going to do battle at the container level as to how secure it is or not.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
There's a lot of truth to that, right? And there are other things. There's some outdated concepts. A memory page size in an operating system is still basically pegged at 4,096 bytes, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a very small number, right?
Yeah.
It's a very small number considering our resources today. And some of the algorithms that have been around forever in terms of paging, swapping, memory management, and so forth date back 20, 25, 30 years, right? And so the question it's an open question I'm posing. Maybe we need to redesign the stack. Maybe we're at a point where the stack is no longer sufficient to support the areas which we're venturing into.
Well, I think it's going to be a small number of people that have to actually pay attention to the underlying OS and infrastructure, whereas everyone else is going to build on top of that. And largely that's because bandwidth and CPU and memory and system resources are so much more plentiful than they were back then. If you were a developer 20 plus years ago, you had to really care about the environment that your code was running in. You had to know the operating system. When you were programming in C, you had to know the operating system, know its limitations, and code very efficiently with that knowledge in mind of operating system concepts. When we get into languages today, again, I think the developers are going to be the first ones to go, I don't know, I know the application really well inside out and backwards. Someone else is handling all of the infrastructure because it's so abstracted from developers today. As security people, we still have to care about everything.
And the other thing, I'll just see what Joff has to say about this, though, was one of the things I think limits that idea, I don't disagree with you, but one of the things I think limits it is just that backwards compatibility problem. Like you say, it's been 4,096 in a memory page for so long, you start tweaking that stuff, all of a sudden it's like, we're going to have to stop using all this stuff and everything's going to have to be recompiled. So I think sometimes that limits people's willingness to even hear about things like that because they start going, okay, everything that came before it is gone, and now we have to start all over again. We have to learn new techniques. So I don't disagree with you. I just think that that's one of the other factors that people have out there going, I don't know if we want to go down that road because we have to get customers. It's the OS2 problem. Remember OS2?
I do very well.
Yeah.
I was in OS2. Well, this is like Security Weekly in the past, historical episode. I was an OS2. Many of our listeners know administrator. That was one of my first. I
had a copy of it when it came out. I called IBM and I said, "Can I get this?" And they said yes, and they sent it to me. There's a giant stack of disks, and
floppy disks,
and I tried to put it on 3 different machines, and it wouldn't run on any of them. And they
welcome to my world as the first job as systems administrator.
And I'd read all this stuff about OS2, and I said, "This is such a great thing. It's redesigning the stack. It's just start from zero and build something brand new." and it wouldn't run. I never got it to run on anything because I didn't have enough hardware to run it. And it was this thing like, well, I need ECC memory to run this. And I'm like, wow, that's expensive. And there were all these restrictions that you had to have. In fact, the first time I talked to IBM Tech, they told me I not only had to have ECC memory, I had to have matched chips. So I had to have chips that were from the same production lot and that you could order those. And I called someplace and asked about it, and they were like, oh, yeah, they're like $8,000 a piece, and they come in a gold-plated box. And I never had it. So
I think it's a OS2 Warp version.
Well, yeah, later.
Later when it became Warp, I think.
Well, they fixed it. I actually fixed OS2, and they got it run on like,
in the most recent version, I tell you what, in my assessment at the time, this is in like 1997, that's how old I am, and it was far superior to whatever Microsoft was offering at the time.
Yeah, it was all the specs on it were awesome, and it sounded great, and I was like, I'm going to try it.
Documentation wise, I would always like get an error, and it would give me a code, and I'd look up that code, or it would get an error, and it said, research this error, and I would research that error and say, please contact your systems administrator, error number something different number. Then you go research that, and it says you should contact your systems. I am the systems administrator. God damn it.
Yeah. No, we've all been there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's a good example, though, somebody trying to start from ground zero. And
it had like a PS exec type functionality in OS2 Warp.
So it
I don't remember what it was, but
great product, but it just never was. You couldn't get people to adopt it, and it meant giving up everything you had and starting over. And
well, it's a very good illustration of how legacy of developed products affects the forward progress, right? And Microsoft learned this, the hard way almost, right? But they learned it well, and they're like, we have to do backward compatibility. They got that message. And guess what? The entire security industry, I would actually go out on a limb and say, is pretty much born out of the need to do backward compatibility, right? Because we all take advantage of the fact that, companies, deployments, etc., need this backward compatibility thing. We could always say, hey, go ahead, get on the latest thing. You'll be great. But then the customer would come back and say, what do you mean? You mean like 90% of my shit's not going to work? I'm like, yeah, upgrade. It's cool. Right?
So that same thing happened with Solaris 2.0.
Yeah.
If you remember that?
I do.
I mean, basically Solaris 2.4 was the first really usable. Some may argue 2.3. But yeah, because Sun had to go reintroduce all the compatibility libraries.
I'd go with 2.4.
Well, when IBM started selling AS400s, one of the main tenets of AS400 and OS400 was this will always work.
Oh, and AS400 is not a mainframe.
No, it's not. It's called a mini computer.
A mini computer. I couldn't think of the term. We called it mid-range, and I'm like, something like it's mini, a mini computer.
But
mini computer?
Yeah. They called it a mini computer, so it was somewhere between a mainframe and some kind of like whatever the hell a PC was.
Micro PCs is actually what
but OS400 was supposed to forever. As long as we all live, you'd always be able, if you knew how to use OS400, you'd always be able to work with it. And even if they add things to it, it's always going to keep working in the past. So you can keep those apps, because a lot of people develop proprietary applications for AS400, and they're running big manufacturing concerns off that. And one of their big problems with buying was I don't want to switch brands. I don't want to rewrite all this code. I don't want to rewrite all our proprietary software. And so IBM was saying, look, it's always going to be cool. You'll always be fine. I mean, we may add new features, and you can use them if you want to, but you don't have to.
And those things would run forever.
They still running. Yeah. You go out there and find them right now. I bet you go in a manufacturing shop somewhere if you could find one.
There's an AS400
you'll see an AS400 sitting on a grimy shelf somewhere covered in like metal shavings, and it'll still be sitting there churning along with Twinix.
Older than most of the people who are your students.
Milking machine cables attached to it, and it'll still be happy and running along, and nobody even knows what it's called. And now it's called J Series, but
is that what it's called?
Yeah, they changed the name of it.
Yeah,
it's called J Series.
Who remembers OSF1?
Cool.
Yay!
What was OSF1?
It was sort of the bastard child of VMS and Unix to run on an Alpha chip.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Wow. I think we all try to forget that.
Yay!
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
that-
Most people
that's
don't even,
interesting.
when we say alpha, a lot of people probably, that was a different chip architecture, right? Like
It's
Intel,
RISC.
ARM, MIPS, and
RISC based.
it was a RISC-based alpha
Yeah,
chip
right,
that was
right.
specific to DEC. At the,
Was it VAX? It
it
was on
fa-
VAX.
It was,
yeah.
de- it was DEC.
it was digital equipment.
DEC.
Well,
I mean,
yeah. I mean, it was the VAX, but those boxes.
Yes.
Yeah. I have
the
one somewhere.
consolidation that's occurred
bring it
in
for
that
the
market
shelf.
alone, right?
Weighs about
I mean,
300 pounds.
Yeah.
Intel fought like hell to dominate that market, but for a while there was a lot of diversity in the processor market. You know, Sun was in the game, DEC was in the game, right? AMD is still in the game. Right? There was a lot of stuff going on. Motorola was there, you know, and for the mainstream computing device, Intel won. But you know, that consolidation may not necessarily have been a positive development for the market. I mean, having that diversity was good, and it also reminds me of the fact that I think from the security industry perspective, as time goes on, your memes are killing me. As times go on, we have seen security risk migrate up the OSI stack, right? We've seen it in the infrastructure level. We've seen it layer 2, layer 3, and we see it at the operating system level, right? And then it starts going even further, right? It's going up into the application layer and beyond. And so as things mature, there's this definite trend of risks and vulnerabilities migrating up the stack as well, along with the technology. That's it. That's all I got to say.
Lee was just about to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that sort of also has drive some of the specialization. I mean, when I started in '89, my first firewall, I was the network guy and the system admin and et cetera, et cetera. And you wouldn't combine those things today because of the complexity and intricacies of getting the security right and the performance right to get the mission done. I think when I was somewhere in about 96 or 7, I convinced management that we needed a separate team with a separate skill set for the application layer on the box for web applications, which we're growing. I think what I'm leading up to. I think as we continue down, we may see yet another layer of specialization as we continue this path to change the layers up, for lack of the right term.
I don't know where I was going from here. Now I forgot.
We totally fucked him up.
I was going to go to the next segment. Is what I was going to do because
okay.
we're up on time.
There's always that.
That's a great idea.
How about that? All right, with that, we'll take a short break. Come back with the security news for this week. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.